Good evening, and welcome to the November 18th meeting of the Concord Select Board. I want to remind everyone that our meeting is being both broadcast and recorded. The first item on our agenda is the consent agenda, on which there are town accountant's warrants, minutes to approve from October 7th, the executive session minutes not to be released, gift acceptance from trustees of town donations, $10,000 to the Silent Fund, the Concord Free Public Library Corporation, $2,500 to the library gift account, Sunday entertainment licenses, the Concord Orchestra, December 8th from 1 to 5 p.m. at 51 Walden Street, the Holiday Family Concert, the Trails End Cafe, December 1st, 6 to 10 p.m. at 97 Lowell Road for dancing. We have a number of one-day special licenses, all for Saltbox Catering. November 30th from 6 to 9 p.m. at 40 Westford Road, wine and malt. All of these are wine and malt. December 12th from 6 to 9 p.m. December 18th from 4 to 7 p.m. December 19th from 4 to 7 p.m. December 2nd from 5 to 8 p.m. December 17th from 6:30 to 10 p.m. and December 10th from 6 to 10 p.m. All wine and malt and all at 40 Westford Road. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Town manager.
I apologize for not having a written report in the packet this week. The only thing I'll touch on briefly is we did issue a statement last week regarding some equipment that has gone missing, that went missing back in October, and a caution to employees and residents to monitor personal information. I don't have much more to add than what was in the statement. We're still in the process of conducting active investigations, both criminal and administrative. So as soon as we know specifically the population that's been impacted, we'll be sending out proper notifications. We are receiving guidance in this matter from both legal counsel and data mining, but a company that specializes in helping research information and help us figure this out. So we're doing everything we can as fast as we can, but it is a time-consuming process.
Do you have any kind of a timeline as to when?
I wish I did. I mean, hopefully a couple of weeks. I mean, like I said, it's happening as we speak. I just don't have any sense of when it all will all wrap up.
All right. Any additional questions from the town manager? All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda are the chair's remarks. I do have a few. First, we had a successful Veterans Day ceremony. Thanks to all those attended and to all those that assisted to make the event so successful. Thanks also to Congresswoman Trahan and Representative Gouveia for attending the ceremony. If you were at our last meeting, I said that the issue of a proclamation for the Coca-Cola Cheese Shop event would be on the agenda tonight, but it is not, because at the time we had to post our agenda, we had not received a request for a proclamation. So subsequent to that, we did receive one, and it will be on our agenda on December 2nd. One of the important things that we're going to be doing over the course of the next couple of select board meetings for essentially the rest of this calendar year are beginning to be prepared for the annual town meeting next April. And I want to remind everybody that there is a town meeting preview event on December 7th at 8 o'clock here in the Selectmen's Room. That's particularly important for town committees who are thinking of proposing warrant articles, and most importantly for individual citizens who might have an article. It's very important for the town moderator and for the select board to understand the scope and the nature of warrant articles that we will be dealing with the town meeting. This Wednesday, I also remind you that the chair's breakfast will be here at 7:30 in the morning. I hope all the chairs of the various committees will be here. We will be taking up, as I said, over the course of the next couple of meetings, making sure we understand the warrant articles that we will probably support and bring to town meeting. And I wanted to go over those just very quickly, not for discussion or debate, but just to sort of alert everybody. I learned from the town moderator and subsequently our State Representative Tammy Corvea that any home rule petitions that we have before the legislature in the Commonwealth, that if they are not passed or if they're not passed by the end of the legislative session, which is December 31st, we have to reaffirm our support of those initiatives at town meeting in April. So that involves 3 warrant articles that were passed. Two of them last year are affordable housing, the real estate transfer tax, and the building permit surcharge. And then the petition article we had to allow 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. So those are all pending in the legislature, and if they are passed, terrific. But if they aren't, they will be warrant articles, and we might not know that until December 31st, so we will need to prepare warrant articles in the event that they are not passed. In addition, we have been discussing over the course of the last few months, and we have heard from some committees of warrant articles that are likely to come before us. The first, we heard from the Finance Committee on a stabilization fund for the middle school project. And so that's a warrant article that will likely come before us and that we will likely support. The Pollinator Health Advisory Committee has informed me that they are contemplating a ban on the use of neonicotinoids on all or any new leased land by the town. The Retirement Board is contemplating an article to do with COLA parity for non-exempt employees. I have mentioned a couple times before special liquor licenses that we will petition the Commonwealth for so that we could issue them to places like the Umbrella. Means-tested property tax exemption. You'll recall that we passed that at a previous town meeting, and the Tax Fairness Committee and the Assessor's Office have been working on that to correct or make more simple the administration of the act, and also to remove a sunset clause. So that will come to us as well. And there is likely to be a new affordable housing appropriation request. So I just wanted to alert everybody to those warrant articles that will be coming. I have proposed copies of all of those here that I'll give to the town manager. Some have already been reviewed by council, others need to be, but I'll give those to you, Stephen. So that's my remarks. Yes.
Mike, that's really helpful to know, to get started knowing all that. And I just want to mention again that on December 7th, when we have that town meeting preview, I'm not able to attend. I have a fair to do.
It's a fairly informal meeting.
Right.
If you're listening and you're a citizen thinking about a warrant article, you don't have to have the article laid out. If you're a committee, you don't have to lay it out. You just want to be able to say to the group and to the moderator a warrant article about this.
Right.
So it's very, very informal. All right, 7:05, a public hearing to change officers' directions and ownership interest at 99 Restaurant of Boston, doing business as 99 Restaurant and Pub located at 13 Commonwealth Avenue. I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So move.
Is there a
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Joe Devlin. I'm an attorney with offices in Newburyport and Boston, and I represent the 99 Restaurants of Boston LLC, which has a 99 restaurant. They're the licensed entity in Concord here at 13 Commonwealth Avenue. Please, as the chair, I can summarize the thick application in front of you.
Please do.
There's two transactions that are occurring, and they affect all 65 locations in Massachusetts, and there's 150-something in 9 other states. They first is they're related to a corporate reorganization. The first is a change of officer at this licensed entity in Massachusetts. They're LLC managers, but they're also officers of the upper tier companies. 2 men are replacing 3 others, and that's Mr. Schnaubelt and a man by the name of W. Craig Barber. Out will be Brent Bickett, Timothy Jansen, and Greg Hayes. These are all people that are at headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. So the other transaction is at the very top of this structure is a publicly traded company called Fidelity National Ventures. That's actually the title insurance company and the escrow company. They didn't want to have restaurants mixed in with their other portfolio, so they created another publicly traded company and made all their shareholders of that, and they transferred their interest into that. There was also some privately held interest at the upper tier, and they've transferred a percentage of their ownership interest, so that now the publicly traded owns about 90%, and the private equity owns a little under 10%. What does this mean for the location here in Concord? Absolutely nothing. Nothing's changing. Nobody who's going in there will notice that there's any difference. Because of the size of this, we were able to go to the ABCC first, and I had these big boxes, and I filed everything. So I've reviewed it with the investigator. He's actually the investigator that I had to do one of these in Gardner for a new license, at the same time, because they were opening up a new location. So that's already been approved. So they've approved this structure in that context as well. So we're about, I think this is number 40, and I've got 2 other people out tonight in Mashpee and Dartmouth. And there's Bill Rickett tonight as well, but they didn't require anybody to come. So we're more than halfway there. There's 65 locations, but no changes here, and if you have any questions, I can answer.
So the management's going to remain
Absolutely
the same?
Operations. There's a Charlie Noyes who's been the president of the 99 since it was based out of Woburn. He's still based out of Woburn. He's still, the president and one of the LLC managers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when is this all scheduled to take place?
The change of officers waits until the approval. The change of the ownership interest has already occurred. I mean, that's controlled by the federal, regulations.
Right. All right, Jeremy, the application is complete and is in order.
Yep, I talked to people at ABCC, and they have reviewed all the forms.
All right. Any questions from the committee?
No.
Any questions from the public? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any further discussion? I would entertain a motion then.
Okay. I move to approve the application for change of officers, directors, and ownership interests for the 99 Restaurant of Boston LLC, doing business as 99 Restaurant and Pub, located at 13 Commonwealth Avenue.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you, and thank you for your help. Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the 710 public hearing for the fiscal year 20 tax levy classification with the Board of Assessors. I entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good evening.
Thank you. Morning, good evening, Mr. Chairman. Lane Partridge, Town Assessor, and Tom Matthews, Chairman of the Board of Assessors.
Gentlemen?
Thank you for having us tonight. I'm going to try and keep this presentation to about 10 minutes to respect everyone's time. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask myself or Lane Partridge. Before I start, I just want to thank Lane Partridge, Rick Ladd, and the rest of the Board of Assessors for their hard work to the town of Concord. They really put in a lot of effort for this report. So this evening, we're going to discuss, this page.
We're going to be on this one.
Yeah. So we're going to go through the assessed values, the tax levy, the tax rate, senior exemption, and then the Board of Assessors' recommendations on classifications. I'm going to go through the slides, some of them a little bit more quickly. If you'd like me to stop, please let me know, but you do have this packet before you.
We will.
And we'll go on to the next one.
That's a little better.
So this is not a recertification year. The DOR requires recertification every 5 years. Town of Concord treats it. We do everything the same, but our next recertification will be in 2023. So this one, new growth, this is an important one for the Select Board to be aware of. So we're looking at a period from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. So in residential revenue, we saw an increase in taxes of $1 million, $1,053,567, and that came from an increase in value of about $74 million. So we saw about $787 of that of standard growth for new single families and additions. We saw some condominiums, 2-family, 3-family, and then some land and mixed use. And we got a little bit about $123,000 from personal property and $17,000 from commercial. So all in all, in 2019, we saw a growth of about $84 million of new value and revenue of just shy of $1.2 million. Okay? So we're on to the total taxable value. So residential went up, as you can see, about 3.68% from 5.9 million to 6.1. And commercial industrial went from about 525 million. Did I say that right? Is it billion?
No, that's
All right. So overall, the town went up in value by 3.7%. All right. So the fun sheet now, the tax levy calculations. Last year, the fiscal year levy limit was around 88 million. And if you add in the statutory 2.5% allowed increase of roughly 2.2 million, and plus the new growth of just under 1.2 million, our total before any debt exclusions and overrides is 92 million. You add in our debt exclusion, that's roughly 6.8 million. And right now, the town of Concord has a maximum permitted levy of 99 million. But our fiscal year 2020 property tax levy is 95 million, roughly. So we have an unused levy limit of about $4 million. So the town's in great position for that. So on our next slide, we're going to look at how the tax rate is calculated. So we take the fiscal year 2020 property tax levy of roughly 95 million, and we divide that by the total taxable valuation, which is 6 billion. I think I said 6 million last.
When you get to these numbers, it's
Such big numbers.
big numbers.
$6 billion, so I apologize for that earlier. So that comes out to a tax rate of roughly $14.21. And this is before we factor in the senior means tested exemption. So the 14.21 is the rate that comes out in the calculations. So on this slide, we have the senior means tested exemption. So the qualifications, age 65 or over, income requirements of the state circuit breaker program, home value under the town median, and with an asset limit of $250,000. So you can see from the chart up here, we had slightly about 13 fewer applications in fiscal year 2020, but we were able to approve 95% of the applications versus 83% of the applications last year. Total granted was $144,000 in 28. The residential rate shift is going to be about 2 cents. And for every penny that the tax rate changes, that's about $70,000 of cost. So the unified rate is, as we talked about, 14.21, and the shifted rate is going to be 14.23. Any questions so far? I don't want to go too fast.
Just
right?
one quick one?
Yes.
Do we have any idea why there were so fewer applications for the means test?
We
Defer to Lane.
don't. I can't, there were fewer, there were some from last year that applied that were not going to qualify and wouldn't qualify this year. So I think some of them just didn't apply because they were, we had explained everything last year, so they didn't come. So it's the other 3 that were missing there. I don't know why. We did have some very late filers that missed the deadline by over a month.
Yeah.
And so that, we just couldn't let them in because we had to do all these calculations. So that due date is pretty hard on this particular thing. So we reminded them, we put them on the list, and they will get reminded again next year, so they won't miss it.
Thank you.
One other question,
Yes.
back to the unused levy limit.
Yes.
What is the trend in that? Has that been about steady or increasing, decreasing?
Since I've been here about 9 years, we've always had significant
Right.
excess levy. In the last, we've been hovering right around 4 million for the
good.
last 3 at least. Carrie, can you remember, does it go back further than that?
Well, the last 3 years, it's been about this amount, 4
Yeah,
million?
we've been right around 4 million, a
Great.
little over 4 million.
Okay.
It's been as low as like 3.8, 3.9.
Okay, great.
But it's pretty good.
Okay.
Thank you. So a classification issue, the residential factor. We're going to talk about that. We're recommending that we do a residential factor of 1, which provides a uniform tax rate for all classes: residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property. Concord has used a uniform tax rate for 22 years. And, we've talked about the fact that this creates an ease of administration. And we also look at the fact that 92% of Concord's revenue comes from residential. If you do a little bit of a shift of the rate to the commercial, industrial, and personal property, it changes the residential factor from 1 to 0.999 and a few decimal points. So as I talked about before, a 2-cent shift raises about $150,000, $144,000. So, the Board of Assessors supports a single tax rate for all classes, and we do recommend that you adopt the 0.99903. So one of the issues we have to talk about tonight is classification issue of open space discount. This is a little bit of a misnomer because, we do support open space, but this discount does not provide the amount of discount that our taxpayers deserve. So we recommend that you don't have open space, but rather we use chapter land. So if you look in the report, under chapter land, the discounts range from 75 to 98%, whereas open space only gives us 25%. The next one is a residential exemption. This is another one that we do not recommend. And this is a shift in the tax basis from the residents to the commercial. We only see this in 13 of the 351 communities in the state of Massachusetts, mostly inner city and in the Cape. And then the final item is small commercial exemption. This is another one that we do not support. And so we'll kind of move on for this one as well, unless you need any. Summary. All right. So the summary from the Board of Assessors is the recommendation to have a single tax rate by adopting a minimum residential factor of 0.9903. It's deemed to be the fairest to adopt in apportioning the tax bill in Concord. And then the Board of Assessors does not recommend the adoption of the open space discount, the residential exemption, and the small business exemption.
And this is essentially the same recommendation that we've received from the assessor and your board for as long as I've been on.
The last 22 years.
No surprises to me.
No surprises.
No surprise.
No, and it's exactly the same as last year. The the minimum residential factor changed slightly just because the numbers moved. Last year, I believe we were at 0.99987. So, it's a very small shift to maintain that same tax rate for all classes of property.
this is a question that really doesn't relate to this, but is it, I mean, it does, but is it possible to have differential rates based on the value of property?
I don't believe so under current law, Massachusetts law. You can do a shift from the commercial, industrial, personal property versus residential, but you
I'm talking
can't.
within a class.
Yeah, you can't do it within a class. I'm not even sure a home rule would be allowed on that. It's pretty plain that it's 100% of value in a single rate for that class of property. So I think what you're asking is, can we have a higher tax rate for higher value properties? I don't think so.
Well, it was the other, I was going to say.
Other way around?
lower-
Yeah, well, you'd have to do one or the other, because we still need to collect the same amount of money. So it would be, the closest you could get to that, I think, would be the residential exemption, which would be pretty tough to administer. If you're thinking that route,
No.
you'd need to give us at
Just
least a year
question.
to
Just a
prepare.
question. Don't
Good.
throw anything at me. Great, are there questions that the board wants to ask? Well, go ahead.
Not so much on your recommendations for adoption, but just a detail. Under mixed-use commercial and mixed-use residential values on page 7, comparing fiscal 2019 to 2020, I see some differential there. Is that related to depreciation or in those two categories, or?
Trying to find which ones you're looking at.
It's in the report itself,
This, are you on the new growth one?
right after that, in the report itself.
Oh, you're in this one.
Yeah, on
okay.
page 7.
Thank you. Yep, okay.
And under residential is mixed-use residential category, and under commercial industrial is a mixed-use commercial. And I see a difference in numbers between fiscal 2019 and 2020.
Right, we've gone down on that particular one and the residential one.
Right. So is that, in terms of the commercial, is that depreciation factoring in there, or what?
So when you have a mixed-use commercial and mixed-use residential, they're the same property. So what that means is that it's a property that is maybe retail on the first floor and an apartment on the second floor.
Right.
We had, in both cases, we had properties that moved out of that category, and that's why those are changed.
Okay. It just struck me this year.
Yeah, it wasn't a valuation issue or anything
Okay.
else. It was just that they no longer are in that category. They've switched to something. They either went all retail or they went all residential, one or the other, so then they move.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Nope.
Well, you have other members of your committee here.
Yes, we do.
Would you introduce them for us?
Yes, absolutely. We have William Herring and Tori Lambert are both here tonight.
Thanks very much. And thanks
you.
to your committee. I know how hard they work, and
Thank you.
you guys will get crazy busy in February or starts that. And
It's
Elaine-
coming, yeah.
And Elaine, thank you too very much for
You're welcome. My
coming and
pleasure.
all the work you've done. I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
I think we have several related here. Move to accept a minimum residential factor of .999903, which will maintain a unified tax rate.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye. Move to maintain the senior means tested exemption limit at 0.5% of the residential levy.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move that we don't accept the open space discount residential exemption or the small commercial exemption.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Move to accept a minimum residential factor of .999903, which will maintain a unified tax rate, maintain the senior means tested exemption limit as 0.5% of the residential levy, and not accept the open space discount residential exemption or the small business exemption.
Second? I think
That was
we've
a
already
repeat.
basically done that.
It's just been, yeah.
Right.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time
Thank you
tonight.
both very much for
Thank you.
coming, and to your committee members as well. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to put this together. Thank you.
Did you sign the LA 5?
I did.
Yes.
But I don't think others have, and you need just the 3 signatures will do the job.
We can load it tomorrow morning.
Okay, great.
Waste no time. And waste no time.
Yeah, right.
Right, the next item on our agenda this evening is the presentation of the PEG Access Advisory Committee Summary Report.
Good evening, Board. My name is Scott Hopkinson. I'm the current chair of the PEG Access Advisory Board. In your package tonight, you'll find 2 items. One is a summary of our goals, and the other is our 2-page summary of the 3-page summary of our survey, which we conducted on behalf of the Minuteman Network. What we'd like to do is ask you to read the 3-page summary. I'll talk over that just for a few minutes. This summary is actually divided into 2 parts. The first part is purposefully divided into factual information that came from the survey, which covers the first 1¼ pages.
Yeah,
And then the
we
second-
received that in our package over last Friday, so we're, I think, ready to go.
Okay. The second part of which is our recommendations based on our observations in that survey. So just to summarize, we surveyed over 300 folks that responded. They responded either through web pages or by filling out paperwork. Based on those responses, there was response for most interest in the government channel aspect of the PIG, or Minuteman Network, then followed by the public and the educational. We noticed that a lot of customers these days are using over-the-top services, which means instead of Comcast and looking in channel, they're using such services as YouTube to watch the information. And I think some of the indexing that makes that available is very important. Third item on this list is the overall effectiveness of the PEG and Minuteman Network. And the scale was, on that scale of 5, it was relatively low, 2.27. There are some specific recommendations that came out of the survey from the surveys. First of all, making it easier for the clients or the customers or citizens to find the programming. Recording more town and committee meetings, which I think there's been improvements in that area. Improving the quality of the sound for board meetings and committee meetings, and I know that there's been improvements made in that area. Recording local events. Creating professionally produced local programming. Introducing school-based training for citizens, and create programming for them. And alternates, one of the other requests we saw was creating alternate studio or editing space away from the school, which we noticed can be a conflict because of the proximity to the school. The last thing on this front was based on those responses, respondents prefer TV programming about local issues, local news, local art scene, local nonprofits, in that particular order. I've asked Carlin to just talk to the other aspect of this survey, which are the recommendations from the committee. So I'll turn this over to her.
Before you do that, you said you had 300 respondents.
That's correct.
How many did you ask?
This survey was included in the...
Sent out to the entire, it's Carlin Reed with PEG Access Committee. So we sent it to the entire households for Concord and for Carlisle.
That
So,
would be over 6,000 homes.
More like 8,000 homes, households.
6,000
Right.
in Concord.
and you got 300 responses.
And received 300 responses. Now, it was sent out, also posted online. So there was that's the total number that we have.
Both online and,
Total amount. That's right. This was the first time we did this survey. So some of the respondents said, we had no idea that there was such a thing as Minuteman Media Network.
yeah.
So this was also an educational tool as well.
Okay.
And as you can see, one of the concerns that we had in the recommendations was this may not be truly representative of what the two towns want. That was the first suggestion. Next year, or not next year, 2021, the next time we do this, perhaps add some more demographic questions. age, residents, that sort of thing, so you can get a better idea of whether it is representative of what the town folks, the respondents, actually want from the programming. A couple other recommendations that just a quick highlight. Scott's going to talk briefly about the division between PEG, education and government. Number 2. Number 3, there was a concern about the changes about having an alternate studio. This document was signed in September. That's before the regional school district changed its security policy that now allows someone to go on the school grounds to do the editing at the studio during school hours with certain qualifications. There is a need for videographers. We're finding that there's an increased demand for not just the government program, but in the public and the education. And the committee is somewhat concerned that there's not enough staff to meet the growing demand. So that additional funding for videographers, perhaps even through the co-op program of the Minutemen VOTEC High School, which they have an excellent co-op program, that could be a source for additional assistance. Another recommendation we have is to make sure that the calendar is updated regularly, and to make sure that the committee has the ability to monitor the funding sources and the funding amount, the revenues, the expenses of the PEG access, to make sure that we are providing adequate funding for the services that the town is requiring. There are 3 buckets of data that we've requested, and we've not yet received it. One bucket is the quarterly report that we receive from Comcast. This goes to the town manager's office. This particular one is from January through March of this year, but there are 2 more that we've not yet received to review. This is the statement of revenues that Comcast sends every quarter. We've also not seen the opposite, the corollary of that, which are the revenues. How have the monies been spent for those quarters? Sorry, my apologies, thank you. The expenses, how the money's been spent. That's the first bucket. Second bucket is the annual budget for the PEG Access program that will be coming before the enterprise hearing in March. And the third bucket is a 5-year capital plan, because this is an enterprise fund. We've seen a 5-year capital plan presented to the finance budget subcommittee earlier for some of the other enterprise funds, but not for the PEG Access Fund, which we think has about $1 million in it, but we don't know. So those are some of the recommendations that we've asked, is to have the financial data presented sometime this month, as much as possible. And we can discuss this further with the town manager's office at our committee meeting, which is this coming Wednesday at 7:15 at the studio.
I'll be there for that. I'll be substituting for Jane. I don't
Excellent.
recall your charge having financial oversight responsibility.
That's actually a question that we asked Jane to bring to the board here, and that was one of the follow-up discussions that we wanted to ask. Specifically, there's 2, I think, fundamental questions that would help illuminate the task for us. We've just for a moment, I'll just call your attention to this summary of what we thought was our responsibilities, which was written really starting about 9 months ago. We finished it in September, I think, or July actually. But the fundamental question I think that would help guide this committee is to weigh between 3 very distinct aspects of what we might do relative to the Minuteman Network. One is financial. Are we to provide any oversight or recommendations on the transactions and the financial aspect of Minuteman Network? The second one is technical. We have a lot of capability within our committee and a lot of experience in dealing with the technical aspect of what the Minuteman Network is involved with. I personally wrote the business plan for the Concord broadband program. We also have people that know a great deal, and we'd like to understand that you want us to advise you on that front, because we have a lot of knowledge there, and we have some concerns about some of the decisions we have been made. And the third one is about content. So we certainly understand the content, and we would divide that again into the public, education, and government. We have recommendations on that front. We put that on the agenda for this next meeting, because we know that that's an area you'd like us to be concerned about. But the broader question that I'd like to hear from the select board is, what percentage of our energy and time should be spent on the first of each of those 3?
And in speaking to the question about our charge, the purpose of the PEG Access Advisory Committee, according to the charge, is to monitor the effectiveness of Concord's PEG Access services and to help the Select Board ensure that those services conform to the requirements of the Comcast franchise agreement. A necessary component is making sure that it's adequately funded and the funds are monitored by somebody. Now, if you remember from last year's town meeting, someone, me, stood up at midnight to defend our article number 20, no, article number, whatever, it was the PEG funding article from a request to reduce the PEG funding. I felt comfortable as the former chair making that defense because I had reviewed the quarterly data, the annual budget, and the capital request for the next 5 years, so we knew what the funding sources were going to be and how things were working. What we're asking for is for that information as the financial component. We're also asking to be allowed to help with the technical aspect and the content as well. And if content is the primary focus of the committee, content covers all three. Fair enough?
Yeah, I think that's one element as well. But this isn't a piece of advice. We're actually looking for the Select Board to give us a specific response on this subject matter. We're not just presenting something here. So pleased to understand that. There is one other element of this that we've also noted, and I want to bring to your attention in addition to all this, is that we part of what we look at in the contents of Minuteman Network is where the funding comes from, which is the franchise fees paid by Comcast and only Comcast. As you know, we have a lot of transition into the Concord broadband, and the other thing that we see as a dark cloud on the horizon is the proliferation of 5G, which could mean that Comcast stops pulling wires in Concord, stops delivering television over cable, and delivers it over wireless, and that may, in fact, have an impact on their need to pay the franchise fee, which means that in 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, Concord as a town may be having to consider how to pay for the Minuteman network. So this is some of the long-range thinking we've been taking into account, but
We've talked about that before.
I didn't know.
That's come to our attention, was part of the discussion when we moved from, I've forgotten its old name. What did it used to be
PEG?
called?
No, Minuteman, no, I'm sorry.
CCTV, I think, yeah.
Yeah, previous, that was a
CCTV,
nonprofit.
when we were
separate.
talking about taking CCTV and making it, as it is now, Minuteman Network, that was one of the worries or concerns that I think
Sure. Well, I think it's a
Good
concern
talk.
either way, and I think many communities will be facing that. We don't think it's going to happen very fast. I would make one comment about the reports that we've noticed and the comments that we've heard from the Comcast rep, who will be here Wednesday, by the way, is generally their subscription rate is going down, their dollar amount per subscription is going up, and it's netting out to be very near zero or a slight decrease, not nearly as much as you might think. Yeah.
And the annual budget, for those who don't know, is roughly about $400,000 a year. So that's the parameters we're working on. So we need your advice.
Well, I think we were not prepared to provide you with advice. I thought tonight, the item on here was your survey report.
We took the opportunity to
No, that's fine.
restate this question that was brought to the.
That's fine, got no problem with it at all. I think what I would suggest we do is allow us to get this back on our agenda, not your survey, but the issues that
Yeah.
you've raised, and get it on the agenda and talk about it as an agenda item after we've had a chance to think about it.
Perfect.
And get you back in here. I can't promise you it's going to be before the end of the calendar year. Things get a little crazy. But I would say, we have to be careful. This is a town department, and like other town departments, this is run and managed by the town, and the town manager has responsibility for it.
Yeah, I think that's something, we had a conversation, I had a conversation with the town manager maybe a little over a month ago on this very subject, and I think that was some of the clarity that we're trying to make sure we understand, which is if it's operational in nature, we understand that may be beyond our scope, and that's part, maybe my lack of this is the first committee in the town that I've been involved in, and understanding
Thank
that
you.
balance is something for us.
Well, it's a balance for every committee,
Sure.
natural resources, any of these people. It's a fine line between the town department who's got responsibilities for day-to-day management and longer-run capital management of the town.
Sure.
And then our great gift of having so many talented citizens around that can really provide advice and guidance. So the
And that's why we
finance
came to this question.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and, finding that line for every committee is something that, takes some time. Technical is another. We have a chief information officer in town,
Sure,
Mark Howell, you probably know
I know him very well.
Mark. He has responsibility for doing that. We've talked, when I first came on the select board, and actually Mark and I have exchanged emails on it not too long ago, but creating a technology advisory committee, which wouldn't,
My green card, please.
which wouldn't
It's already
be
in, I think.
aimed at
Yeah, I think-
Minuteman, but would be aimed at, as technology becomes more and more important to the efficient functioning of the town, to have a citizen committee that can provide the same kind of.
There's actually already a committee that's been in stasis that was around broadband and cable.
Yes.
And I think it's been not in existence for at least 5 years or more, because I've been inquiring about it when we worked on this broadband activity.
No, it was right before we went into broadband that it was operational and then
Yeah.
disappeared. So let's get you back on the agenda. Yeah,
Can I just offer a couple points of clarification?
you can do
Yeah.
anything you like.
Sure. Scott is right. We did have a conversation about that, and thank you for the conversation. I think one of the things that I want to, as somebody who's new, I've learned that the town's level of involvement as the kind of operator of Minuteman Network is also relatively new.
Yeah, so this committee was started when it was still the
just-
separate entity.
Couple years old.
But I think in terms of roles, responsibilities, things like that, I think the town is somewhat figuring out and growing as we're getting more and more into it. For example, I did find the email just now, and I'll get it over to you. But
Thank you.
the quarterly Comcast report went to 3 people who no longer work here.
Oh,
Yeah.
So I was able to access an email to find it, but that's one of those things where, an honest mistake because of the level of turnover that we've had, especially in the town manager's office.
Right.
But I think the other part of this is, and we did present, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, the general fund, budget, enterprise funds. We have a budget calendar, and the enterprise funds are going to follow. And I certainly look forward to discussing those with the PEG board as we go.
Well, good. So we'll get this back on our agenda, and Jane is the
She's the liaison, yes.
right.
So I'll ask Jane, to work with you guys to kind of tee it up, and then
That would be
we.
good. Yeah, I think we have a couple other subjects we'd like to cover quickly in that context. But
Can I
Yeah,
ask
have
some questions?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So this is a new committee and a new venture, and I'm new on the board. So as you were presenting, I had a number of questions. So you've gotten the first quarter of the Comcast, and Stephen, you say you got the second and
I
third,
do,
and the third quarter too.
No,
To be
the-
specific about the dates, we
Yeah.
have the January through March 2019, which I think that would be the fourth quarter.
Oh, what? Okay.
The third of the
Is it
fiscal,
calendar year?
this is fiscal year stuff.
I'd say we had previous reports leading up to
We
the
had
quarter.
all of last year.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So we have January through March of 2019, but we don't have anything after March of 2019.
So I can speak to that. So I did find through June 30th,
Okay.
or April to June,
That's the second, there should be one more. There should be one more.
but they run about a month and a half between the time the
Okay.
end date
Yeah.
and the time we receive it. So the next
and see.
one, the September 30th one, should be coming in any day.
We might get it
Okay.
Wednesday, actually. Yeah.
We don't have it yet. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't.
No.
As I mentioned, the rep will be here, and we understand there's a lag time, that's all.
Okay.
I mean, I think
Sure.
that's informative, but again, the broader question is, and just the point you and I talked about, which is how much do we worry about the operational side of it? How much do we put our focus there, or do we put it in another area?
Right.
That's the direction you're looking.
So one of my questions on this sheet that you have 4 goals.
Yep.
And the last one says, monitor Comcast compliance with the franchise agreement to safeguard community interests. So how well do you feel that Comcast is complying?
That's actually really well timed. This is an evaluation that we will most likely be answering in our annual report to the town, because that is one of the things that we do, is that we'll put together an annual report. At this point, we don't have a whole lot of data about complaints concerning Comcast, only because we've not really sought or asked for them, and people have not responded. Part of what we've been doing with this committee is, for the first couple of years, focus on getting the Minuteman Media Studio up and running.
Right.
After that, as we get closer to the time when we renew the franchise agreement starting in 2021, then focusing more about how Comcast itself is providing its cable TV service. Now, Terry, I can give you my personal opinion, but that doesn't give the committee's opinion or the overall view of how things work. But let me tell you this, if you have a complaint about Comcast, feel free to send it to us, and we can send it to our representative, who's already established a chain of command like that.
They actually have a mechanism to log, report, and summarize complaints that come their way. And the circuit breaker, if you will, for that is a mechanism that comes through the town website for complaints to be filed. We do get some number of complaints coming to us first, because people don't know where else to go. Just as we get a number of complaints because broadband doesn't reach Kais Road or Concord Green, which has nothing to do with our committee. And it's actually, we put it in the bottom of our meeting agendas now and say, don't bother talking about that here, because go talk to broadband. So
Okay.
the other thing I would say is, generally they appear when we ask them to come to our committee. They answer our questions in general. They're pretty reasonably open about that. They never answer more than we ask. They never offer extra information. We expect to ask them some rather pointed questions around this 5G long-term plan on Wednesday, just to get a sense of where that's headed.
Okay, so if people have complaints, you're saying they should submit them through the website?
That is one way to do it. Another way is to send it directly to the Comcast company, which is printed on their Comcast bill.
And you get it that way?
If you send it to the committee's website, it'll go to the chair and to the public information communications manager, who is Aaron Stevens.
Okay, right.
That gets forwarded to Comcast. I believe the ones that go directly to Comcast, we don't get the details.
No, we
a
won't.
Summary.
Right.
They'll give us a summary report
Okay.
of the number of complaints they have and the general nature of them, but they don't give us the details.
All right.
And there's a complaint reporting mechanism with the State Department of Telecommunications and Cable, but it has to rise to a certain type of complaint before it's recorded there.
Okay, I have two more questions. So you talked about how the franchise fees might be declining in the next 5 years. Is there a way to have any kind of a franchise fee from customers that are on the CMLP broadband?
I wanted to ask that question, but we decided to stop that dialogue because we were afraid it was stepping into the operational side of this. Which
Okay.
is, this is exactly, it was raised as a question in one of our previous meetings. We thought, what a great idea. As we shift from Comcast to broadband,
Right.
can't the cost of that shift there? But we realized, hey, wait a minute, that's stepping into Stephen's space and that's
Okay.
operational.
Plus, it also is mixing the concept of cable TV service and broadband. The franchise agreement deals with only the cable TV component.
Yeah, and that's another subtlety of the Comcast agreement, is that fee is not based on the broadband services, it's the cable TV component.
Right.
Okay.
And nowadays, that's mixed up with broadband, cable TV, telephone, and alarm services.
Right.
They could.
Mixed up is the word.
They could shift their all fees to the alarm services and we'd be out, tomorrow.
Right. Okay, and then the last thing I was confused about was, you talked about your annual budget is 400,000, and then there was another figure you said something
Yes,
about
that's the
1
enterprise
million?
fund, I believe is roughly $1 million.
That's the balance of the assets that were part of the public television. There was a separate entity that was brought back into Concord, and some portion of that was given back to Carlisle, I believe.
I'm not sure how it was actually divided up at this point, but that's the,
So
that's the
when-
capital fund we
The
keep
town
talking
took
about,
over,
a reserve account.
Oh, okay.
not only the capital equipment, which is one of our first questions, which is why we asked that question, there was a tremendous amount of capital equipment that was brought back into the town's ownership. We wanted to understand that because we didn't understand this balance. And the other part was the reserves that were accumulated.
Okay, it's a reserve.
Weren't spent.
Okay, so your annual operating budget is about 400,000?
I think that's correct. I'm going to look at Carrie LaFleur, our finance director, for confirmation if she happens to be looking up that information, which I suspect she may have been, but maybe not. Okay, she's looking up that information. Perhaps we could take another question if there's something while she's getting that answer.
Well, what kind of stuff is in the operating budget? Is it the staff and the,
I think it's dominated by the staff.
Yeah.
We did have a budget subcommittee, and we did have data from a year ago. Actually, we got the old data from the separate entity, because when they started this
Right.
organization, they basically started running it with almost zero planning, so they had to kind of transition and do
Okay.
it. And we did get access to what the previous
Okay.
We need
budget
to,
Yeah, I'm
was.
done.
And that's, I think it's around 80% of
You
that.
said
They have some transcoding services. They also buy equipment on a regular basis. They have backups they have to do, all coordinated with Mark.
okay, yeah, thanks a lot. I just, if you're going to be asking for our advice, I want to try to
Oh,
understand
no, I
it.
appreciate that.
Yeah, okay.
And I do
said
encourage
you
you
had a
to.
couple other items we need to, if you can.
Well,
be
there's only
pretty
one
brief.
other one that and maybe this is just a personal request. We have on a regular basis, town citizens that show up our meeting asking about the Article 20 of 2018, which was an article that specifically said the town would not take over the television, this PEG access activity. I've had conversations with the town manager about what the ruling was. My later understanding is that apparently there was a lawyer in the room at the time of town meeting that said that was advisory only. I'd like, if there's any collateral we could have, so that whenever someone raises that issue in our committee meeting, that we could simply hand them a piece of paper and say, this is a position of the town on this subject matter. We don't necessarily want to deal with it, but I'd like some clarity on that.
Sure, we'll get you some clarity on that. And we'll be back in touch with you when we're ready and you guys are ready.
Perfect.
Carrie, do you have an answer for Carlin?
So for fiscal '20, the operating budget is about $328,000, and the capital is about $272,000.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, for your work on this committee and for coming to talk to us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a review of the Baptist Brook deed and easement. Ms. Kay, good evening.
Carrie, what year was that? What year was that?
20.
20, thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Delia Kay, Natural Resources Director here on behalf of the Natural Resources Commission. This is a fairly straightforward project, a land conveyance, as many of you may recall. In 2015 and 2016, Concord Pastures LLC received a special permit and an order of conditions allowing the construction of the 22-unit planned residential development at Black Horse Place. And I apologize because I like to provide the board with a graphic showing where these conveyances are. So I've just passed one around now, and I'll just very quickly review it. This is the Acton-Concord town. The Acton-Concord town line is here. Acton is here, and Concord is with the parcel data on it. The conservation lands are in light green, and the Baptist Brook parcel is highlighted in a light blue. And then the yellow hatch are trails that are existing trails throughout the property. You can see that they connect from the Baptist Brook parcel up to the 118-acre conservation land at Inerstack. And then Baptist Brook is shown as one of these blue lines coming through the property here. So that's something I apologize I did not provide earlier in the packet, but I did provide you with the deed that was granting the nearly 29 acres of conservation land. So that was a condition of approval for both the special permit and the order of conditions. In addition, the applicant agreed to construct a four-space parking area on their common land and provide perpetual maintenance of that. That will be covered by the homeowners association, so at no cost to the town. They also gifted an easement from that parking lot over the driveway that goes into Black Horse Place and connects to the trailhead on the new conservation land. So there are 3 conveyances for your approval, and the one thing that I would just like to request is that if you noticed in the quitclaim deed for the conveyance, in paragraph 6, it says that the property is conveyed subject to easements and restrictions of record insofar and in force and applicable, which is standard language that is in a deed.
Yeah.
But we did have a title search done, and there are no, other than the Tennessee Valley pipeline, which goes through the property, there are no other restrictions and easements of record. So we would like to have that language struck from the deed, and Town Council is working with the Concord Pastures LLC Council on having that. So if the board does approve this conveyance, I would ask that that language, we could work out, modifying that language, that the approval be subject to removal of that language.
So if we go ahead and approve this, we would approve it.
And still allow the, well, I would suggest, since we haven't heard back from their council, that the language be that we have the ability to strike that language if it's agreed upon by both our council, which it is, and their council, who hasn't yet gotten back to us on that.
Can I just ask, does that apply to the land conveyance, the easement conveyance, or the parking easement area conveyance?
To the land conveyance.
I think one way you can do this is accept the conveyance and then authorize me to enter into a deed for the property, and we can straighten out the language, and then I can sign it without having to come back to the board if you want to handle it that way.
Well, I don't care, whatever's easiest, if that's the easiest way forward.
Yeah, I mean, we could do it that way, or you've done it in other situations where it's just been, under the direction of the Natural Resources Director.
We've just let Ms. Kay go ahead and do it, unless you want to do it.
No.
Okay, so we have a motion.
And where is the parking going to be located?
So if you look on the graphic, you can see where the construction is underway. It's just the big open area. Mm-hmm. And it is in the vicinity of where it says Black Horse Place. That's approximately the vicinity of the parking.
The 4 red squares there?
No, it's a little.
It's going to be tiny.
I Google Earthed it earlier.
I see.
It is there. It was constructed a few years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
So it's just south of where the trail comes to that end of the conservation land.
Great.
All right. Do you have any other questions?
No.
Linda, do you have any other questions?
No.
Well, I think we're ready to vote, and we'll have 3 separate motions on this. So, Linda, you're the
Okay,
motion.
we're going to give it a stab here. Move to approve the conveyance of 28.9 acres of land for conservation purposes exclusively and in perpetuity in accordance with MGL Chapter 40, Section 8C, granted by Concord Pastures LLC on September 3rd, 2019, and accepted by the Natural Resources Commission on November 6, 2019, shown as the common open space parcel on the plan of land recorded at the Middlesex South Registry of Deeds as Plan 521 of 216. And authorizing the Natural Resources Director to correct the deed to indicate the appropriate title holds. Do it?
Or to revise the deed if so needed for the correct
Okay,
language,
To revise the deed.
correct easement language, yeah.
Okay, second?
Are you comfortable with what you have?
Yeah.
Is that-
The last part, I'm to authorize the NRC director to revise the deed to
If
indicate the
acceptable.
correct
Yep.
title holder.
Okay.
To revise the deed, sorry, I should have written this. To revise the deed, if acceptable to Concord Pastures Council, to remove language referencing easements and restrictions of record.
Did you get all that?
Let's try it again.
Try it
Okay.
again, please.
Sure. To revise the deed to strike language referencing easements and restrictions of record, if acceptable to Concord Pastures LLC.
If advisable by.
Read back
If
what you,
advisable by. That's
if acceptable by Concord Pastures LLC.
All right. Now your
Now
second.
we're ready for the
so-
second. Okay, second.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Delia, very much for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And then the other two?
Okay. Move to approve a pedestrian and equestrian easement over the access easement area and cart path easement area granted by Concord Pastures LLC on September 3rd, 2019, and accepted by the Natural Resources Commission on November 6, 2019, as shown on the plan of land prepared by Stamsky and McNary dated February 8th, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And the third motion for the parking easement area conveyance, move to approve a parking easement area for up to 4 vehicles granted by Concord Pastures LLC on September 3rd, 2019, and accepted by the Natural Resources Commission on November 6, 2019, as shown on the plan of land prepared by Stamsky and Maneri, dated February 8th, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is discussion enforcement of parking policy during the holiday season. It has been our practice for the last couple of years to eliminate parking fees on the Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving and each Saturday in December. And I would propose that we do that again. The business community appreciates it, that folks trying to come downtown, especially if it's cold outside, don't have to fumble for orders.
I think there's been a favorable response to this in the past, so. Yeah.
And this is in all the village centers or
Townwide.
town-wide? Okay. Okay.
So Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving, and then all Saturdays in the month of December. Is there any objection, or
No.
Linda?
Move to eliminate the parking meter fees on Friday, November 29th, Saturday, November 30th, and on each Saturday during December 2019. All standard parking violations will still remain in effect.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you. Sorry. I have to talk at the same time. So I just wanted to offer a brief update on the preparation of the fiscal year 21 town manager's budget. Last week, Carrie and I presented the budget to the Finance Committee, to the Guidelines Subcommittee, I should say, and talked about how we are, I think, rapidly closing in on a budget that will, in fact, meet the guidelines. We are, as I mentioned, I think the last meeting here, that there would not be service reductions. I think we're past the point where we are worried about that. We do, I put in your packet, really just kind of notes or talking points that I presented to the Finance Committee that kind of highlight some of the areas that we're working on in terms of different things in the budget. I won't go through all the data, just the items of note. The request, the total amount of the request for additional FTEs was 4.85. We are, and again, we're still in draft form, but the way it's looking right now, we are looking at recommending two. One being, and you can see this below, a land manager in the Natural Resources Department, and also a dispatcher to have a second dispatcher on overnights, which I will tell you from my experience in doing a lot of dispatch stuff is probably going to be a mandate at some point in time in the near future. And the other initiatives you can see are an increase to the legal services budget. We know we have a few things currently on the front burner for legal services, and I think we can see ahead that other things are going to be coming down that the town will need for additional legal services. So we're increasing that budget. We are also adding some funds into the visitor center budget to in the name of economic vitality, in terms of perhaps looking at elevating an existing position to be an economic vitality coordinator. I will say that the Economic Vitality Committee hasn't had a meeting yet, and so I want to have some discussion with that, but we're at least putting in some funds aside for that purpose in the budget. So one of the things we're also doing is each town department has their own building maintenance line items, which includes maintenance costs, supplies, but then there's also custodial. We are consolidating all of the building maintenance and supplies line items into the facilities department, which is a part of the facilities department continued growth and evolution. We think that that's going to yield some economies of scale and some savings, so we are reducing the cumulative total of all those line items. We're reducing by a relatively small percentage, just to make sure we can still maintain the buildings, but also, like I said, I think we'll be able to do it for a lot less, or somewhat at a discount. On custodial services, those are going to remain with the individual departments' line items because certain facilities handle custodial services different ways. Townhouses has in-house employees. DPLM has an agreement with Minuteman Arc. Other places have contracted services, so that's going to take some time to unwind, and find and we may maintain that status quo. And then there's a restructuring of the fire department. I think I mentioned it last time that we're looking towards to not add positions but elevate certain positions, so there's a more comprehensive command staff on every shift. And then the fire department wants some more training, and so even with these expanded things and the decreases in the credits you see above from the community chests and the emergency services stabilization funds, we're still able to meet the guidelines. And so the question is, why is that? And Carrie has a magic wand in her desk drawer, and no, the reality is there's been a lot of attrition. I made the comment about, I was able to find that Comcast email, but it was addressed to 3 people who weren't working for the town, I think, when the email came in, or weren't at their post. So I have observed in my time here that there has been a lot of turnover. And I think that leads to attrition and savings, where people who have been here a long time retire or leave for another job, and the people who come in after them are going to be lower on the wage scale. So that's attrition savings, and that, especially with the public safety departments, is a big part of our offsets, if you will, this year. And the reason I mentioned public safety departments is because the fire department training is something I think I'm supporting, simply because we do have a younger department. Same thing with the police department. We have at least 3 new officers, and so when you look at the difference between a senior top level patrol officer and a new officer, now that difference doesn't stay in place forever, but it certainly is for a few years, and so right now we're kind of on the front end of that. We are in the process of still looking at capital. We think the capital plan will the capital requests will by and large be able to be met and keep on the target. We're targeting 2% of cash of general funds, levy capital, and then 5% of borrowing for a total of 7%. And I think we're also looking at what funds do we have currently that are maybe are obligated but unspent, and and maybe carrying some of those forward, and maybe addressing some of the requested needs with existing funds. But overall, and I want to thank Carrie for really doing a great job pulling all this together and coming up with some very innovative ways to help us, like I said, prepare a budget that is balanced, meets the current needs, addresses perhaps some expanding needs, and meets the guidelines as put forth by the Finance Committee.
And, remind everybody what the timetable is for sort of finalizing your budget.
I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I think it's December, mid-December, where it should come to the board, which I think that'll be easily done. Yeah, I think we're just about ready to go.
Questions? Yeah, I noticed that I think you mentioned, Stephen, at last meeting, that, and I see it here, the number of lines where it says capital transferred to operating. I didn't quite catch what that was about last time.
So part of the facilities department, and I should just let Carrie answer because she's the one who told me this. But it's in relation of how the the facilities department was created and funded initially versus now.
Yeah, so the thought process when the budget was put together last year is we are growing this facilities department. We brought in different trades people, and a lot of the work that they would do would be things that we would have contracted out. So if they're replacing heating systems and electrical and that sort of thing, it would have been charged to capital. And so in the fiscal 20 budget, there is a large portion of that, what you might consider operating budget, being charged to the cash portion of our operating capital budget. But because most of that really is salaries, it seems to make more sense to put it in the operating side of the operating budget versus the operating capital side of the budget. And so it's just a shift. But we are still meeting. We have the requirement to spend 2 to 3% on operating capital. We are still meeting that target. We're just at 2% rather than pushing the upper limit of that.
And just to follow up on that, I think if there were notable projects that we thought we'd have to cut to stay at the low end of the target, I think we would be flexible on that. But I think we're going to be able to largely accomplish just about most of the things we want to accomplish.
Linda?
If you get further pushback in terms of, if I understood you correctly, you said you've reached 4.85% in terms of the guideline?
No, we are at 2.5%.
2.5, okay. And
District. Oh, no, 4.85 is right. No, we got requests for 4.85 new positions.
Okay. I just want to be clear about that. So all of these positions then are included in what you've presented?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We're only recommending 2 positions. So the requests that we presented on the 4th, on the previous meeting, the 4.85 was in there. We're recommending 2. One of the things that we did as a part of the budget process is we did basically an inventory or an audit, if you will, of positions that are funded in budgetary line items or department line items that are vacant and have been vacant for, say, a year or more. And there's a wide variety of reasons why positions are vacant. It could be difficulty finding qualified applicants. It could be maybe the needs are being met elsewhere. There's a lot of reasons, and so we want to make sure. One can make the argument, if it's been vacant for a year, do you really need it? And so we did kind of an audit of that, and I think we've sifted through most of what is out there. The goal is to, if it's vacant, they don't lose the position per se, but the funding would go into the salary reserve account. So the budget for the department isn't artificially inflated by people who aren't actually working there.
Right.
If they need the funds, if they decide they find somebody great during the year, or they decide they need to meet that need currently, we could do a transfer from the salary reserve back into the department budget, and then that would be documented. Everyone see what happens.
So I know you've talked about the need for a reclassification of personnel, a study for that. So are you expecting that the impact of that will be felt this year,
So interesting you ask.
or this coming year, I should say?
We actually are on Friday or Thursday, we're meeting to kind of initiate that process. That's one of those things where it came in as a request, and we looked at, do we have any in the existing funds for that we could apply to fund that study, or at least get that study going. And I think we've identified, I mean, the attrition savings and some other things are present in FY20 as well. And so we're going to look at current year funds to do that study. And yeah, I think it's past due, to be honest with you.
Sure. So you're hoping then, I guess from that response, I'm guessing that you're hoping that the impact of that study would be felt in the FY21 budget?
So salaries are something we need to spend some more time on. I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
Okay.
It's hard. I don't know if you have a prediction on that, but I don't know that we know enough now to say that there's definitely going to be changes in the compensation schedules.
No, I would say it's just too early to know. We haven't even started. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Is that the professional services thing? Are you going to be doing a classification study?
It wouldn't be on here. The classification study is something.
It's not funded as 1B professional services. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, actually, that is,
Yes, that was the request.
okay, so the first three, what's the difference between the first three columns and then the columns that say appropriation? Some of these are the requests and some are what are in your latest draft? I'm trying to figure out what these columns
So
mean.
go ahead.
So the first two columns that are shaded in blue, that is, or maybe I should start with the third column over it, that is the gray column, that is the request. What is in the blue is what the town manager is recommending. The first column is the full recommendation. The second column is the impact to the general fund. So for a lot of expenses, there are chargebacks to other funds.
Right.
And so the first column is the full request.
Okay.
Then the impact to the general fund is the second. I mean, the recommendation.
Yeah.
So like for this professional services, those are blank, but then there's other columns that show, what are those other columns?
So are you in 1B, professional
Yeah.
services? So there was a request that is not being funded.
Oh, these are the requests, the last few columns.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And what are the lines that say credits? Like in 1A, the first two things are credits. What is a credit exactly?
So that is, there is a charge or a credit from the BD Enterprise Fund to support the town manager's operation. So there's oversight from
Okay.
the town manager's office, and each of the enterprise funds
Got
pay
it.
for a portion of either the town manager's time or, in this case, the deputy town manager's time.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Stephen, I have one question and then a comment. The question is, if you go forward with a budget like this and it stays within the guideline, what is the kind of salary pool that's going to be available for town employees?
So, current salaries are funded through the town manager's recommendation, so the current payroll. And then we have a salary reserve account that would cover increases for COLAs, other types of adjustments like adjustment, if we were going to adjust the scales, and then also collective bargaining agreements. I think we have two that are going to be up in FY that expire on June 30th that would need to be funded. So the salary reserve account really catches that as a placeholder. And I think we've been using past practice for the salary reserve as our guideline, but you know, we're trying to take a fresh look at things and look back at expenditure histories as well as appropriation histories, and so we're in the process of kind of doing that right now.
Okay. So the next time we'll see you, it will be in, I mean, we'll see you, but next time you talk to us will be in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Or 4.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I'd have to. I should just look at the budget calendar and just give you the dates while I'm here.
That's all right. So I'm going to be in 2 weeks or 4 weeks?
2 weeks or 4 weeks, in December.
Yeah.
According to this, it is December 3rd. On December 5th, regular meeting vote final budget guidelines to be issued. That's the finance committee.
So
Yeah,
it'll be
after that, yeah.
So it'll be the 14th. All right, that's fine. All right, I just, my last comment is I was glad to see in there that your support for that land management position. I think that's something that will be very valuable. The next item on our
Can I
agenda.
just ask one question about that? Do we have a vacancy in that department right now? Is that right, or not?
We may. I don't know.
Conservation?
Right. I thought that's, maybe I'm
We did have a
confused.
vacancy.
We did have a vacancy.
The assistant director
Right.
is new.
But she's.
Oh, we have a new, we
hired
have,
a new.
okay, that's where I was confused. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is a review of appointment policies and procedures, APP 10. So just to bring everybody up to speed, we've been reviewed this and made a number of corrections to APP 10, and there was, APP 10 is the policy and procedure for folks becoming members of committees and boards in town. And the issue was, came to our attention, whether or not people who didn't live in the town could serve on committees, and we thought we would try to tighten that up a little bit.
All right.
But as it turned out, the language was probably just about as tight as you wanted it, to leave us some flexibility to be able to appoint somebody if the need arose. At the end of our discussion, though, there was a continuing discussion on page 56 in terms of office as to when the terms of folks ended. And Terry, you, I think, did some work and
Right, Linda had a great suggestion, I don't remember the wording, but
it's in here.
yeah, we weren't sure if there was a state statute requiring something about May 31st or a town charter rule or anything, and Jeremy actually did the work. Thank you. And there isn't anything that prescribes May 31st or any other date.
All right, so the consequence of that is that in a minute, Linda is going to propose an amendment to this, essentially setting the parameters around which terms of committee members, unless otherwise prescribed by statute, will end. Okay? So Linda, if you would propose that amendment?
So item number 13 on page 56 would now read, all terms unless prescribed by statute shall terminate at the end of the month following town meeting or May 31st, whichever is earlier.
Okay. Right?
Good.
And that was a motion, I hope?
Yes?
And there was a
Okay, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
And then the second item
And the second item?
is on page 57, and it's under eligibility of appointments.
Okay. Yes.
Actually, we've approved this
We did
already.
that.
We already approved
We have
these.
approved that already. I just happened to
Right.
see it redlined tonight, so, okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much for your work on that. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it. Committee liaison reports. Linda?
Okay, let's see, CPC has completed the interviews with all the applicants. They've begun their sort of discussion period where they're will begin to sort out where the awards will follow for each of those applicants. As I previously mentioned, members have filed disclosure statements and/or have now arranged to recuse themselves from certain aspects of this. A unique year because of the number of relationships that existing seated committee members had to the applications that had been submitted. So that they're in good shape on that. And I just want to remind everybody that tomorrow night, Tuesday, November 19th, at 7 o'clock will be the public forum held at Kais Road. And it's an opportunity for both applicants and the general public to comment on the various applications that have been submitted. I attended the Affordable Housing Trust Study Committee, which is working at a pace, as I've previously mentioned, and will coming to the Select Board on December 16th, hopefully with a bylaw draft as a result, to follow up to the town meeting article that was approved last year. I stood in for Jane at the Magic meeting for MAPC, and they gave an overview of the 2015 long-range plan that they've put in place, and it covers all the traditional areas that you would anticipate: transportation, climate change, zero carbon housing, the whole range of things, not unlike some of the items that we see in our own Envision Concord plan. The benefit of that particular committee is that 11 different communities, 13 different communities are represented in the Magic area. They, at this meeting, quickly share highlights of basically planning, in the planning category of activities that are going on, as well as other information. It was of note that some of the surrounding towns either had just gone to their town meeting with accessory dwelling unit by zoning changes, or we're just about ready to do that. So there's a lot of activity in that area and the surrounding towns. The StarMet Reuse Planning Committee met to summarize what had happened at the forum that they held earlier, as well as to review some of their suggestions for the comment for the consent decree. Did you get that material?
We did. I signed and submitted a comment letter on behalf of the town today. And
Good.
I would just note that the comments were relatively light, thoughtful, but I think the fact that we didn't need to put in a lot of comments asking for a lot of things is a credit to the work of the committee who helped develop the consent decree all the way along. I was actually struck by how little we had to really push for because of all the work that had gone in advance. I want to commend the committee for that.
Yeah, very good.
It made that comment job a lot easier.
Yeah, very good. Mike already mentioned the successful Veterans Day flag burning ceremony, and several of us attended that. ZBA, I want to do a shout out to them. They frequently deal with issues that evoke a lot of public comment, and at the most recent meeting, there were a number of citizens there concerned about potential addition to a building structure that was going to be in their neighborhood. And a decision was not made that night, but the chair and the committee went out of their way to provide ample explanation to the citizens about the standards they use for making their decisions, how it differed from other decisions that have been approved or not approved, previous decisions. And I really made the people in the audience feel heard and this item is continued to a future date. But it's a good reminder for all of our committees in terms of being responsive to citizen comment and how we handle it. So a real shout out of praise for them for that. Attended the Saturday morning Running for Office program that was sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the town clerk's office, and that was taped. So there are, for people who are interested in running for the open offices, which is one position on the select board and one on the school committee, if I'm remembering correctly, do look at that tape, and it's going to be very helpful. And then I also want to remind everybody that this Thursday night, there's both a planning board public forum on the proposed zoning changes for town meeting, very important. And I hope people beyond the planning, that typically attend planning board meetings, will give that committee input. And also on Thursday night is the Hanscom Area Towns meeting on November 2nd, Thursday, at 7 o'clock in Lincoln, and Colonel Chad Ellsworth from Hanscom Field will be speaking. And again, there are hopefully some citizens who are interested in that operation will attend that meeting. So that concludes my remarks.
Right.
Public ceremonies you'll mention.
He is he's the base commander.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Terry?
Okay, so we had our first capital planning task force meeting, and the chairman will be Todd Benjamin, and I was elected to be the clerk. I also attended the CSEC meeting last week. They're working hard on a spring event with some kind of pamphlet or flyer that's going to have some kind of a diagram in it like this. It won't be called the Concord Ideal Home. They're struggling with the name, but it's going to be something like Your Concord House in 2025. And it's going to show how you can be sustainable in all these different parts of your home. And then you can have backup information about contractors or how to look it up online or whatever. The Public Works met last Wednesday and approved the sewer appeal for the Giroux property.
Oh, good.
And you probably already knew this, but I didn't realize this. It's also going to enable the house next door, the Concord Housing Authority house at 355 Com Ave, to become part of the SHI now, the subsidized housing inventory. I didn't realize that, but it needed to be hooked up to the sewer. So this is actually going to have several advantages. Another thing that happened at the Public Works meeting, we were treated to this very interesting meteorological forecast for this winter. And they said there's going to be an average kind of winter with big temperature swings, average precipitation, warmer, a little bit warmer than normal, and a lot of black ice. That's going to be the biggest problem this year, black ice. Snowiest period they're predicting is going to be between January 21st and March 10th. So let's see if they get that right. But I guess he said 30 years ago they couldn't predict things like this, but they have all kinds of markers over in the Pacific by Ecuador, and it was just fascinating watching all of this. Let's see if they get it right.
So that means they're slightly less inaccurate than they were 30 years ago.
Well, he had one slide showing all his predictions from last year and checking off that all 6 of his predictions were correct. So let's just see what happens. I hope he's right. I don't want a real snowy winter. Obviously, Public Works is getting all their plows ready, all their sand ready and everything. And especially they're reaching out this year to the businesses and the Chamber of Commerce. One of the big problems is those frost heaves around the meters. They're really going to We're trying to work on that this year. And then I attended the Minuteman High School tour yesterday, which was really interesting. We met a lot of the students, a lot of the teachers, and they have so much enthusiasm for what they're doing. And I highly recommend that everybody go and see the building with the state-of-the-art equipment and meet the people there. It was an excellent tour. That's it.
Thank you. So earlier this evening, I attended the Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee to bring them up to speed on various ad hoc meetings I've been having with folks around the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington, Concord, and trying to do some groundwork to get us organized, and we'll be back to this committee at some time in the future with a more formal proposal. I also raised with them the issue of how does an event become a town event? What's the process? And as near as we know, there's no process. So I asked them to see if they could work on that and get back to us. I met with the school, I attended a school committee meeting. They had a very busy agenda talking about the Concord Public Schools capital plan. They also discussed again a warrant article that had to do with the road in front of the BD Center and parking. And they're trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do with that. That's not giving credit. It was a long and productive meeting, but those are two things stuck in my mind. I attended two finance committee meetings, one on sustainability. Mr. Banfield made a presentation, and then, which was very interesting. And then Thursday, I attended the finance committee meeting where the town manager made his presentation. I attended the Concord Municipal Light Plant meeting where they had a very extensive legislative overview and spent time talking about the strategic plan, the follow-up of the strategic plan, open and public hearing that they had here, which too is very interesting. I attended the Business Partnership Annual Dinner. It's at the Colonial Inn. It was quite good, and I attended the Tax Fairness Committee, the committee that brought us the senior, and they're sort of working now on making sure they're getting formalized to get their warrant article in front of town meeting. And that's it. And Jane, welcome.
Hello.
We are in the process of liaison report.
Well, I have a fresh one.
So you could perhaps tell us where you've been and what you've been doing.
I've been at the Board of Health public hearing on the proposed tobacco legislation, vaping and tobacco products. And it was a public hearing, so the intent was not for the board to debate their proposed language, but to hear from those who came. And let's see, we had 1, 2, 6.
Should we pass this down?
11 speakers, most of whom represented either a specific convenience store in town, or some level of groups of convenience stores, and their comments were not surprising. It was general agreement that selling vaping products to minors was a bad idea, but there was and I'm way overarching the conversation, but the other point of consensus was that adults should be free to make their own choices. And the proposed regulations would move all tobacco products in Concord to adult-only stores separate of a convenience store, so that you had to enter into a separate building to purchase these products. The other thing that's happening is that there's legislation moving at the state, so which would, while not, identical to this, would certainly take on a number of the issues. So there's while this clearly started as a reaction to the severe burns, the vaping epidemic, which has really appeared out of nowhere over 3 years. And the other unified point from a number of health professionals who spoke was that the injuries were far and wide more severe than anything that they had seen, and that up until the entrance of vaping products, which were intended to help smokers transition off of tobacco, the trend in tobacco sales had gone way down, and that now the vaping products have just taken off, especially in the target market, which was probably one of the most eerie points I heard. And again, without taking a position, it was offered by the state policy of the youth risk behavior studies that, that 96, that if you look at just where's tobacco's marketing budget, 96% of it is aimed at convenience stores now, at convenience store markets. So, which are the target market almost uniquely of our youth and teenage population. So it's a real.
So did they indicate when they will come to some kind of conclusion?
The next public hearing is going to be on the 16th of December, which is also a select board night. And then they will take it under advisement. And I think they were also hoping that the Senate will have made it still come to a decision. And yeah.
Great.
Coincidentally, that is the night that the budget gets presented.
16.
Oh, good.
Right. Thank you, Jane.
Yep.
So next is miscellaneous correspondence. One email from a consultant for Concord Academy concerned about cell phone coverage in town and asks if the police had any recommendations for carriers that they could use that would have better coverage. So again, it's a general reminder that we can't let this go on because it's a public safety issue. Committee nominations. Linda? Did I miss something?
No.
Oh, good.
Have we done public? Yeah, okay. Lisa Evans of 91 Wither L. Drive to the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee for a term to expire May 31, 2022. Sue McGrory of 59 Lee Drive to the Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee for a term to expire May 31, 2024.
Committee reappointments.
Harry Bartlett of 152 Commonwealth Avenue, number 5, and Jennifer Montbach of 45 Pine Street to the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee for a term to expire May 31, 2022.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Committee appointments.
Gavin Morrissey of 38 Aurora Lane to the Trustees of Town Donations for a term to expire May 31, 2022. Dawn Rennert of 39 Revolutionary Road to the Economic Vitality Committee for a term to expire May 31, 2022. Court Booth of 144 Wright Road as the Concord Carlisle Regional School District representative per committee charge to the Financial Audit Advisory Committee for a term to expire May 31, 2020.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next item on the agenda is public comments. Seeing two, well, your hand was up first, Mr. Allen, please. Eric.
David Allen, Heathbridge Road. Looking back to the discussion with the Board of Assessors, we might be served by trying to look forward a step or two from the chair's question raised there. I was pleased to hear him ask whether or not it was possible to use differential rates within a class. Why was I pleased to hear this question? Not knowing his intention, but it's possible, interestingly, with Boston Federal Reserve data to see in remarkable detail what, and I don't have in my mind the exact phrasing they use, but it's something like financial stress from housing. It's possible to see in remarkable detail what we in Concord face in that regard. It's about 28% of our citizens who, before there are any more tax increases, face already difficulties, financial stress with their housing situation. If we were to, as I suggest, try to look ahead a step or two, there wasn't any answer forthcoming about whether that was possible. In other words, for those who are in a position to pay somewhat more on a percentage basis than others. I'm not expert on this, but I am told by those who I think probably have investigated it that what's necessary to, in fact, go to differentials within a class, in other words, residential, requires an amendment to the state constitution. Now, how can somebody sit up here and seriously talk about amending the Constitution? You might well ask, that is to say. Well, in fact, there's a quite serious effort organized around the country toward a 28th Amendment of the federal Constitution that's standing back and seeing that these things can and do happen. If we were to be practical about it, first of all, the question is, I think it's quite clear, do we really care about this? Do we really want to move forward on something like this? Once again, to go to why I was happy to hear the question, wealth disparity, which is, of course, what's at issue here, it's become painfully clear is corrosive to not just our democracy, but our society. We see it as a most prominent topic in the national primary discussions, and it will remain so. And here we see in our own town, for goodness sake, going on a third of the citizens are caught in this vise. Are we going to be serious about doing something about this? Well, I think that's the question that we have to address first. And of course, the answer might be no. We're not going to try to do something. But if we were, quite clearly, constitutional amendments are not done by a town. It's done by a bottoms-up process. And if we look out across the landscape there, we're hardly going to be alone in this situation. There are going to be other cities and towns, certainly towns, who are faced with exactly the same thing we're faced with, and therefore might well be inclined to join hands. But the first step is to find out whether or not we really are serious about doing it. Thank you.
Ms. Hartman.
Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green, member of the Finance Committee. I would just like to add for the record that as part of the Finance Committee's discussion with Stephen last Thursday night, specifically around the capital budget, we wrestled, and I think wrestle is the right word, with how to give the town visibility or an awareness of the total spending we're doing per project, as opposed to just looking at things on an annual basis. So we talked about things that we could do better to better coordinate between the CPC and the town. We talked about how we could look at how we're funding across many years. And I think we talked about it, but I don't think we really came to any conclusions. But I just wanted to make the board aware of that, and it's something we'll continue to talk about.
Thank you. Are there other citizen comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. Good night, everyone.